Welcome everybody to another fascinating edition of the SBC webinar series, and a really important one today, and one that will have big implications on the iGaming industry across Europe, and specifically in Malta as we look at the country's grey listing and the progress that's been made since then, essentially, and what are the next steps. We have a really strong panel today, bringing all different perspectives. So it's my pleasure to hand over to them to introduce themselves and get the ball rolling on the panel. Yannicka, if we could start with you, please.
Sure, thank you. I'm Yannicka. I'm General Counsel at the MGA, responsible for legal enforcement, policy outreach, and international affairs, and I've been here for around 7 years now.
Brilliant, thanks ever so much. And James?
I'm James. I'm co-managing partner at WH Partners, which is a law firm based out of Malta, and I've done a lot of work in the gaming industry over the years.
Fantastic. And Enrico, to last but certainly not least.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Enrico. I have been in the gaming industry for the past 9 years, and I'm here in the capacity of chairman of IGEN, and IGEN is an industry trade association representing over 25 of the largest iGaming companies in Malta.
Brilliant. Well, forgive the vagueness of the opening question, but you all bring a very different perspective on a complex legal situation and regulatory situation. And there'll be many sort of outsiders like myself, not based in Malta, looking at the situation and not quite with a grasp on how it's affecting each individual sector. So from your own perspective, if you could, just how you've had to adapt to the grey listing of Malta and how it's affected operations for you. Enrico, if you could kick us off on that one.
Yes. So first of all, the grey listing was I would say, a surprise. We all thought it was going to be a close call, but nonetheless, it was a surprise based on all that the government and the regulatory bodies had done over the years, and it was a disappointment as well, because it is impacting all of us, whether we're based here as professionals or we are business leaders. Our companies are based here, so this is impacting us negatively, and the type of consequences, and I'm sure we will go into greater detail from an operational perspective, start with banking. So we've seen that immediately, whereby banks, especially foreign banks, foreign institutions, are requesting more information, more documents before they approve a monetary transaction in and out of Malta. So they're asking to see the contracts, the invoices that justify even small transactions. So this is adding complexity, it's adding time, it's delaying the cash flows between the companies. And that has started almost immediately, as every financial institution is then adjusting to the fact that Malta is grey listed, which means Malta is a high risk jurisdiction, and the companies and individuals that are based in Malta are therefore higher risk individuals and companies. And then a process of enhanced due diligence is taking place, specifically for banks and financial institutions that are outside of Malta. Those that are inside of Malta, we have not seen that yet. We do not expect, this is something the FIU has issued very quickly, a clarification note, that anything that is within the jurisdiction should not really change. So this is, I think, the biggest one. And the other big one that we've seen, let's say, quite immediately, is the reputational effect. Whilst the grey listing is a very technical matter, and the three items that Malta failed on are very specific and quite technical. Out of 58, items that were non-compliant before. But so whilst the common man in the street, whether in Malta or outside, would not know the details of the grey listing process and what exact, but they've seen the headlines. So this is creating a negative effect by association. And so whether it's recruiting or talking to other business partners, the fact that now we are based, or we're trying to convince people to come work for our companies in our industry in Malta is harder. So these are just two, and I'll stop here and I'll let the other panelists complement with some other points.
Yeah, James, if you could follow that up with is it similar for yourself?
Well, I mean, I think that the three of us move in sort of similar circles, speak to a lot of people who we know in common, deal with operators, with the same operators, or by and large the same, and experiences are pretty much shared. The only thing I would add to what Enrico said, I think, is that in my personal experience, the issue of Malta being rated as a high-risk jurisdiction probably started a little bit before the grey listing itself, with some international banks. So we saw already, probably in the 12 months leading up to the grey listing, a number of international banks requiring enhanced due diligence on customers with any connection to Malta, really, whether it's a company operating from here or owned by people here. And so that, of course, changes the dynamic between the customer and the financial institution. It comes at a high compliance cost, and this cuts across the board. This does not only relate to gambling, by the way. With the grey listing, I think it's just become worse in the sense that probably those financial institutions which have not yet put Malta on their high risk list, their internal high risk list, did so, or are doing so as we speak. And I think a very important measure of how bad it might get is whether or not amongst these financial institutions there are one or more or many that might consider that it's actually not worth maintaining business relationships with persons that have a Maltese connection. I haven't seen that yet in the gambling industry with clients of ours after the grey listing. So there's all sorts of dynamics at play in the years leading up to this, that aren't necessarily only linked to Malta, which have led banks to determine that they need to stop particular banking relationships or stop servicing the gambling industry. But since the grey listing, I haven't personally seen a financial institution terminate relationship with a company which is operating from Malta, which has connections here. I hope it doesn't happen, but unfortunately, everything Enrico said, I think, is accurate in terms of reputation, and banks have to maintain a certain risk profile, and we can probably all agree that actually the gambling industry in Malta is pretty well regulated and conducts itself pretty well. But it's now suffering from the repercussions of this grey listing and the events leading up to it, which if the banking situation deteriorates much further as a consequence of this, could have some important effects on these businesses.
And if I could ask you to be a little bit speculative, how far away do you think we are from seeing the termination of relationships and those big consequences?
First of all, we are being completely speculative. We don't know whether those relationships will be maintained or not. I mean, there's an argument to say that as long as companies observe the compliance requirements which are being asked of them by the financial institutions that surface them, and so invest even more in compliance, then it shouldn't change. But you never know.
Yeah.
I think that if you look at what the risk is now of having issues with the financial institutions that serve as a gambling operator internationally versus what they were before the grey listing, undoubtedly they're higher now. And everybody had hoped that they would be lower because there was a lot of hope that reforms introduced in the run-up to this FATF vote would flip the coin, right? And would result in a whitelist assessment by the FATF. I think that's especially true in the gambling sector, and Yannicka would probably be able to share some of her experiences, if I may, Yannicka, in terms of what the MGA as a regulator has been through over these years in an effort to tighten its own operating procedures, its oversight, its enforcement, and that was in part also, I think, driven by the Moneyval audit which preceded this FATF vote. So I don't know, maybe I'm jumping the gun here and preempting a question you're going to ask, but I don't think this grey listing has to do really with the gambling industry in Malta.
Yeah, and Yannicka, if you could follow up on that, if there's anything to add, sort of from your perspective.
Yeah, definitely. But I'm going to very much agree with both Enrico and James on this. What is listed in the FATF Action Plan is actually very specific. There are 3 points that are listed, and it's public, and anyone can see that they are quite extraneous to the gaming industry. And what that means is that the manner in which the gaming industry is regulated, and the manner and the law and the compliance and everything that goes on here is not being questioned and is not being placed under any increased scrutiny. However, there are, of course, indirect effects, and we did expect there to be some repercussions on even regulated businesses like the gaming industry. And that is what Enrico was talking about before, and it is not unexpected. We understand the inconvenience and the worry that comes with such indirect effects, and that is why every institution within Malta, and we are one of them, have a plan that is being set in motion for Malta to get out of this grey list. But we need to remember that what the grey list actually is that a jurisdiction is being placed under increased monitoring. But the fact that it is called a grey list makes it a reputation issue, because there's no word worse than grey list, I suppose. So what we need to do is address the reputation, specifically because there are no points related to the manner in which gaming industry is regulated in Malta. So our plan is actually to work on reputation and to ease the problems that Enrico was mentioning earlier. We are aware, because we've spoken to businesses, and we've spoken to service providers, and we're still in the process of speaking to a lot of these stakeholders, because we need to understand the practical ramifications that they are experiencing. And that is one part of the plan that we have to get Malta off the list. And rather than only getting Malta off the list, our plan to make sure that businesses that are in Malta and that are regulated in Malta and that are offering a regulated offer, because we need to remember that we also have the goal of making sure that operators who are offering a licensable gaming service do so in a manner that is fair to the players and that is safe for the players. We don't want them to be in a position where being regulated in Malta, where we believe that Malta offers a very good regulatory framework that is fair for consumers, becomes difficult for them to do so, because that might consequently be a problem for the players. So there's a balance that we need to strike here, and we need to make it comfortable, in a sense, for want of a better word, for operators to be in Malta during this grey list process and during this term, because we want players playing with those operators to remain playing in a safe and regulated environment.
Yeah, but that was sort of a question that I had for you, Yannicka. Actually, it's not a question that is or a conundrum, if you like, that is exclusive to Malta. It's one that's echoed throughout the gambling world, I think, and that is, it's about finding the balance between affordability and compliance, and correct marketing as well, and also then having a smooth payment journey and a good marketing presence. How difficult is that, and does the issue in Malta with the grey listing really amplify that question a little bit?
So as James mentioned, there's always been the industry in general was always considered a high-risk industry, to be honest. Now everything that is happening in the meantime with greylist and Moneyval assessments, etc., have increased the risk profile. But the gambling industry was always a problematic industry, even for banks and etc. So striking the balance is hard in the sense that from a regulatory perspective, we need to make sure that the market remains open and consumers have a fair choice, but at the same time that choice is regulated in a way that meets the regulatory objectives of the law. In our case, it's keeping gambling safe, fair, and free from crime. At the same time, there are practical issues that are being faced that operators are facing in other areas like banks and monetary institutions. So, but that is again where we come in. I mean, we do have a part to play there, and that is part of our program and our strategy now more than ever is outreach. In fact, we have a new division within the MGA set up for outreach. And within this division, we're also speaking to international partners of licensees. So whoever they are, they might be having issues with pre-grey list or now even while we're on the grey list, so that we can explain and share our best practices, share our regulatory processes, explain the oversights that we have on licensees, explain how our compliance process and our licensing process and everything that goes into it, from due diligence to making sure that the player is safe, our AML overview. So that is what we are trying to share with international partners, with the banks, local banks, foreign banks, to try and ease the effects that this grey list is having, but also, frankly, effects that have been existing also before the grey list due to the nature of the industry also.
Yeah. So from your perspective, collaboration is really key to the paving the road to recovery from this.
Yes, to be honest, it is our key. It is the MGA's key. So that is what we've taken out of this, because, as I said, there are no specific points identified by the FATF that we need to address. We need to continue improving our regulatory processes, but that's something that we have always done, and not just because of the grey list. So that is normal procedure for us. But at the same time, what we are doing for business and for Malta and also for the FATF, in a sense, is to increase our collaboration with all stakeholders. So be it the police, FIU, etc., but also with operators, with stakeholders, with service providers, and more importantly, in this context, international service providers who might have doubts because of the fact that we are on the grey list, and we are here to explain that the gaming industry was not particularly targeted, or rather the regulatory process was not particularly targeted, and we are here to explain what goes on behind the scenes when giving out a license, when making sure when the license is issued, throughout the term of the license, the compliance, the oversight, etc.
No, the problems lie elsewhere. I mean, this is very clear for pretty much everyone to see. I think locally, anyone who follows what's going on can't be in any doubt that in actual fact the problems lie elsewhere. And in this whole set of unfortunate circumstances, I think the gambling industry in Malta is actually a victim. And unfortunately is suffering more than it needs to, through no fault of its own. It's great that the MGA is doing what it can in the circumstances. I don't think the MGA has any power to resolve the issues which really belie this predicament that Malta has found itself in. I mean, just read the FATF's recommendations and do some research on everything that led to it. It's pretty clear to see what the issues are. I think in spite of this, the gambling industry is showing a level of maturity in Malta and actually saying, look, we've established our business here and grown our businesses here, contributed to the economy. We've found an environment which allowed us to do so in a responsible way, but there has to be action taken in order to resolve the situation and resolve it quickly, because it cannot be that we have significant businesses here who employ sometimes thousands of people, listed companies. They don't want their name really to be associated with a grey listed jurisdiction. I mean, none of them would probably pick it today, I think. They had a choice, really. They had an easy choice to make. So this can become a problem. I don't think it's an insurmountable problem yet, but if this grey listing is going to last for too long, it will become a problem.
Yeah, well,
absolutely. And let me just add a couple of comments to reinforce both what James and Yannick are saying. I think the irony of the situation is that over the past several years, 5 years or more, the MGA has kept on raising the bar for the gaming industry in Malta. Through the national licenses that have taken place in Europe. Most of the iGaming companies that are based in Malta operationally have acquired licenses in those other territories. And that has come at an operational cost of hiring more compliance, more legal staff to ensure that the companies meet those requirements, and the gaming industry has improved, has cleaned it up, has raised the bar in the same way as or following what the Maltese regulator and what the regulators in other European countries have done. And already in the Moneyval assessment in 2019, the iGaming industry was on the green, was fine. So we find ourselves, double victims, if you want. And I like this term that you use, James. I mean, it's incredible, I think, and it's unfortunate in the extreme, to the point that it will have consequences. That Malta has done this to itself. It had plenty of times to address these shortcomings. It had got a COVID extension as well, and yet now it seems that we need another 18 months to get over this. So I can tell you that there is an element of anger and disappointment in the boardrooms, and the contingency plans are being put in place.
That's interesting. And yeah, just this weekend, I read criticism of Maltese governance and the current powers that be in Malta about the reaction and the response to the grey listing. Enrico, is this something that you echo, or have you been sort of a little bit more impressed with the reaction to the grey listing?
So the reaction by which group of stakeholders?
By Maltese governance, sorry, by the government in Malta, I guess.
It's really hard for me to comment on that. The government said the same thing before the grey listing as it's now saying after the grey listing. So there is, the facts speak for themselves. It has been a failure. You cannot see it in any other way. Yes, one can say that 55 elements have been addressed out of the 58, but it's going to take another 18 months, if that's the number that we believe, to get off the grey list, and that was the objective from the start. So this is ultimately this is business. We are in a results orientated business, and this is a failure.
Yeah, and James, anything to add on that? And what if the 55 elements have sort of been hit? What is next? What are the next steps to ensuring that even if it is in 18 months, Malta is off the grey list?
Look, in Enrico referred to the boardrooms of gaming businesses established here. In these boardrooms, you don't have board members going through the 58 requirements and patting themselves on the back or complimenting Malta for satisfying 55 and not 58. I mean, frankly, they don't care if it's 58 or 60 or whatever, but they do care about being able to continue servicing their customers and paying their customers, receiving deposits and paying their customers out as their customers request payouts without having funds flowing. They care about not being looked at by financial institutions, which they continue to work with, suspiciously now, or more suspiciously. Because as Yannicka said, the gambling industry has always been rated as high risk, but high risk and then in a high risk jurisdiction, it's a double whammy. And the second leg of that, the second point was avoidable, right? So that's what they care about. They care about not having to explain to their shareholders why they are in Malta. I mean, they've always been, but you can quite expect that there might be some shareholders now, especially with listed companies, saying, "Oh, is this still a good place to be?" So they care about these things, right? They care really about running I think, a good, decent, profitable business within the boundaries of the regulations to which they are subject. And the gambling industry as a whole has come leaps and bounds over the past decade in terms of this, in terms of abiding by national laws in different countries, in terms of really upping the game and raising the standards, in terms of local regulation in Malta, collaborating with regulators, taking on board increased levels of compliance across areas of regulation that cut horizontally across sectors, whether it's anti-money laundering or data protection. So it's really, the game has changed a lot. And what you have in Malta now is a bunch of pretty serious operators, tier one operators. They don't need this job. This is just an extra weight and burden. And Enrico's right. I mean, 18 months is a long time to wait. Let's hope it's not longer.
Yeah. And Yannicka, if you add anything to conclude sort of on the reaction and what can be done to ensure that it's not longer than 18 months.
Honestly, I'm not in a position to speculate how long it will be. I also heard the 18 months time frame. It's obviously no months are better than 18 months, and it's as frustrating for us as it is for the businesses. I'm sure. I mean, the businesses suffer the practical ramifications, of course, but as James alluded to earlier, there's only so much that we can do, but it's everything that we can do at this point we're doing, frankly. Hopefully it is not longer than 18 months, but I do believe that it will not be a long period. I genuinely believe that it should not be longer than that, and hopefully the businesses will have faith in what we're doing to get out of the list, us and all the other institutions, frankly.
Brilliant. And so to sort of scope it out a little bit again, I did want to talk about Malta's relationship with the EU, and I think it's important in this situation. And as the European Commission launches its new EU-wide directives on strengthening and aligning financial services and strengthening AML standards, what does this mean for Malta, and what does this mean for Malta's relationship with the EU? Well,
we're obviously going to keep communicating, and both with the industry and within the relevant EU fora on this. This is always going to happen in the world of AML. There will always be. AML is so vast, and the game's changed, and it's a focus that we expected at this point. So we will continue to reach out and communicate any updates, and Malta will continue to be fully compliant as necessary with any updated frameworks.
Yeah, and Enrico, James, I guess you just echo that sentiment, right?
So yes, but I think I can also imagine that if I look at the journey, Malta has been, let's say, fighting above its weight, right? And Malta as a country has stretched the rubber band, if you want, went way over the line on certain aspects, and those have been criticized publicly by the European Commission. So I can also imagine that the grey listing is weakening the position that Malta has on these negotiations, negotiations one-to-one on specific topics that Malta cares about, and some of them are of interest to us in the gaming industry. So the Macolin Convention, just to name one, that was recently in the papers. So I can certainly imagine that in that balance of power, Malta, that was already fighting above its weight, is now going to be on the back foot in these negotiations. I can see that happening because ultimately it's going to be a decision of the big countries, and it's been reported that Germany, US, UK were very much the heavyweights that pushed Malta to be grey listed. So I think to use a simplistic expression, Malta must have stepped on a few toes, and now it's been put on its place. So I can imagine that the negotiating position that Malta has on the international scene has been weakened, and this is one of the consequences.
So in your,
I just want to mirror that, and I want to say, this is not even from my experience in the gambling industry, but from my experience of sort of my interest in Maltese history and how things have panned out here over the years. Malta had been able to sort of establish itself as a good actor on the international scene, not a pirate. And because it had established itself as a good actor, Malta was able to do determinate things: join the EU, have a voice, as small as it may be, play the international relations game, take certain economic incentives which worked and were tolerated. But there's in physics they used to teach us something called Hooke's law, which, going back to Enrico's rubber band example, basically if you have a rubber band and you stretch it, right, it will go back to being the same size as it was, and it will retain its elasticity, so long as you don't exceed that the force. The force is not too strong, and then it won't go back. So I hope we haven't exceeded it. I hope we haven't exceeded that stretching force. I don't think so. I think everything can be solved and everything can be made right. But there has to be a realization that there probably is. When you're a small state, the big global players have certain lines you shouldn't cross. Maybe that one or two of those have been crossed.
Yeah, well, I did sort of have a follow-up on, whether Malta is likely to sort of challenge the fifth AML directive or, EID proposals and stuff like that. But from what you're saying, it seems like there's not going to be too much of an appetite to stretch that rubber band much further, and it seems like those policies will be adopted rather than challenged.
I don't know. I don't know. To be honest, I think you'd have to ask the people who are around the negotiating table on this. But if that proverbial rubber band is already very stretched, it would be probably dangerous to stretch it further, right?
Yeah.
If I may, I understand all these concerns and I get where they're all coming from, but I think there's no good can come out of speculation at this point. I'm fairly confident that whoever is around the negotiating table will still make Malta's points in a way that is most productive for Malta and the businesses that are established there. Now, whatever that may be is to be left, I guess, within the hands of whoever is at the negotiating table, and that is why they're there. But I think speculating at this point will not have much benefit, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right. I think
you're
right.
Sense.
It's not worth speculating.
Yeah, no,
it's more worth for the industry, as they have been doing also thanks to Enrico and his hard work with iGen, to be continuing a dialogue with government and with the policymakers and with people on the negotiating table in Europe to see what can be achieved.
Yep. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And yeah, to bring it back a little bit, to talk about the economic impact of the grey listing, is it mainly small and medium sized businesses that have been affected and have been affected by the worst by the grey listing, or is it felt across the full spectrum significantly?
I can certainly tell you that a small business has been affected, as well as a big multinational company, when it comes to this increased scrutiny, enhanced due diligence by the banks, by the financial institutions they are working through. I don't want also to blow this out of proportion, right? So the news is relatively recent, and every financial institution is reviewing their customer base on a regular basis. We have seen this even being done here in Malta by Banco Valletta, where they had issued a few years ago a number of letters closing accounts of gaming companies, some of them also MGA licensed. So it's a process that financial institutions go through on a regular basis. But there's going to be, so the situation is not going to get better. That's for sure. And how widespread and how bad, if you want, the increased scrutiny is going to be remains to be seen. For sure, the fact that as gaming industry, we are not being serviced by the local banks makes this even harder, because up until now, companies were then using either as a primary, as a backup, a bank account with a foreign bank. Now these foreign banks are considering us at greater risk because we are greylisted. And the local banks are no more welcoming towards the gaming industry, which still remains to me the biggest issue that we have as an industry being based in Malta, that the banking industry based in the same country is not supporting us. They're making it very, very difficult for us to establish a trading account here, a business account. And on that, the government should bear, and I hold the government responsible for not having improved the situation. They had promised, but there's been no improvement on that front, which is 100% within their control. There's no external influence.
James, anything to sort of add on that point? Fascinating.
No, I have nothing to add, and I don't like repeating myself, but I'll just repeat one thing. This situation with banking preceded greylisting, and greylisting doesn't help; it makes it worse. That's it in a nutshell.
And Yannicka, anything on the the sort of economic impact? As far-reaching as it's been, how significant has it been for small and medium firms?
I would reasonably expect the issues to be faced by all licensees, to be honest. And as I said earlier, I would imagine that the issues would be, and when we're speaking to licensees, we are hearing that the issues mostly relate to increased compliance controls being placed on these licensees by their international partners, which is what we expected. Now, what we can say and what we are doing is that we are here to support all of them. So be them the smaller size licensees or the big and more established ones. Again, as part of our outreach plan. So if any operator, any licensee is currently facing these issues and they would like us to reach out to the international partners for us to share exactly what goes on here with such partners, because often, and I guess this is a legacy issue, it's just not clear enough, and that's probably equally on us. So we are here to make it more clear and to share exactly what's going on here. Our experience with regulation, we were the first EU country to regulate gambling, and that is something that we should keep in mind all the time. And that is probably one of the reasons why gambling was also not included on that list. I think over the years and throughout our experiences, we've got the regulation part right now. So we're here to share what we're doing with these international stakeholders, and we again invite and encourage any licensees facing any new issues or licensees who have been facing issues to reach out to us, and we will assist and in any way that we can.
Well, yeah, and the point's been made that it's a tough time and it's seemingly going to get tougher. What steps would you advise, generally speaking, firms and companies to take in order to protect themselves as we sort of become embattled through this period?
I'm not that confident necessarily that it will be tougher. I think the unknown of being on a grey list in the beginning might actually be tougher than what will be going on in the next few months. If Malta does manage to get off this list. Again, I'm not in a position to speculate, and I genuinely don't know any more than this. So it might not necessarily be the worst yet to come. So I'm not really into the trying to instill fear of what might be coming, because honestly, it might not necessarily get worse. If Malta does get off the grey list within a reasonable period, it will not get worse, it will get better. And also, as the institutions start to get rolling with their plans and their outreach plans, it will hopefully get easier. But in the meantime, what my recommendation would be the same recommendation I would have made pre-grey list, as the operators should do their part, in the sense they should still remain to be compliant with the regulations. They should reach out to the authority and to the relevant institutions, both when they have an issue and of course when they are being asked to reach out. And they should also, as I have been advocating for a while, do their parts in terms of what I like to call self-regulation. So if they can improve the reputation of the industry. As James said, I mean, here we have a combination perhaps of a high-risk industry and unfortunately being in a high-risk jurisdiction now. But if we can if the industry can definitely work to address one of these two, as can we and as can the country to address the other one. So, but I would still recommend that my biggest recommendation would remain that the industry still reaches out to the authority to let us know how we can assist, especially now, in any issues they may have with their international partners, etc.
And I think on this, it's very important for me to commend the MGA. Certainly over these last 9 years that I've been involved, and especially in these last 3.5 years since we started working with iGen, the MGA has been very much on a great partner, where we could have some very mature and very open discussions on how to improve our industry, and this continues to be a really feel-good factor that would certainly help keep the industry here. And if I may say this simplistically, the problem is not with the MGA, and the MGA is working with the industry very closely, as Yannick has said. If we have an issue, whether it's banks or other regulators, this is another kind of risk that we have not spoken about. But now one of the risks that we have identified is if a gaming company based in Malta is going to go for a new license in Germany or in the US, for example, being based in a grey listed jurisdiction, which is a higher risk, we expect a higher level of due diligence. Now, again, I have not seen this yet, and I've not seen a company being refused a license on the basis of us being based in Malta. But the fact that we can reach out to the regulator in Malta, to the MGA, and bring them into a discussion, a one-to-one discussion with the external stakeholder, be that financial institution or another regulator, to try to make the case on behalf of the licensee, that is positive and encouraging from our perspective.
If I may add something, I personally think that the prospect of there being regulatory issues because of Malta's grey listing, especially if we're talking about cross-border in the EU, is contained. I mean, the freedom of establishment is a very, very strong freedom in the treaty, and also upheld by case law of the European Court of Justice time and time again. Also, if a national regulator sought to use Malta's grey listing as a pretext to perhaps reject a license, that would create a very dangerous precedent. They wouldn't be able to accept Maltese companies, they wouldn't be able to accept Romanian companies. Romania was also grey listed, and who knows what might happen in the future. So that would be, I think, dangerous territory even for a national regulator, another EU country to get into. So I do hope that they will not seek to go there. It may be that they request even more due diligence. It may be. From what we're seeing from the licensing processes in Germany for online slots and in the Netherlands, it seems that they're treating Maltese applicants more or less equivalently to everyone else. So I hope that will remain the case.
Yeah, if I may add to this, we have the same sentiment here, that for the time being that part has not been affected. But as part of our outreach plan, we are also reaching out to regulators and our colleagues within other jurisdictions, both within the EU and not, to again explain what goes on here and the extent of the oversight that goes into and licensing process and everything that goes into giving a license, and the compliance that we go through afterwards. So that is also part of the outreach plan. But again, I would reiterate that if any licensee is facing any issues, and please do reach out. And I mean, we have very good relations with all our colleagues in various jurisdictions. So most of the time, we are able to get in touch and iron out any misunderstandings.
Yeah, brilliant. It's it's good. It really is good to hear of that collaborative approach and that strong hand by the MGA and the strong role that you are playing in. I guess the recovery, if you like, and onto that sort of the reputational. You touched on it earlier, but the reputational impact is potentially significant. What steps can Malta take in order to sort of repair that reputational impact?
I think there are steps that are being already taken, frankly. First of all, I'm not here to talk about in the name of the entire country, but I guess as a country, what we should be doing is addressing the issues identified by the FATF first and foremost. But since, as I said earlier, it is a reputational issue, then we should, I guess, shout louder about the things that were not listed, and that is most of the things. I mean, again, it was only 3 shortcomings that were identified. And that is exactly what we're doing, and that is why our strategy is an outreach strategy, because that is the best thing we can be doing in this scenario. Again, there will be improvements on the regulatory framework, but that's business as usual. I mean, we've been improving the regulatory framework. I mean, we improved it entirely in 2018, but even since then, there have been small amendments and updates, and that is just business as usual. So I guess what we're doing right, we should keep doing right and seeking to improve and making it more known. I mean, because there is a lot of good work that is being carried out and maybe is not or has not been communicated very well in the past, and that is something we should learn from and move on and communicate it in a much better way. So outreach is something that the country is definitely working on, I know, and we are working on.
Fantastic. And Enrico, anything to add on repairing that reputational impact?
I mean, I think the most important thing in this, given the journey that we've been in these last few years, I would say transparency on the progress being made to fix the remaining 3 issues. I think the business community at large, this is not only a gaming industry request or requirement or suggestion, but the time of we've got this under control, don't worry, is now past, and so I think the government needs to regain credibility with us first and foremost as business owners and business leaders, and the transparency on the progress that is being made to get out of the grey list is something that I certainly would like to see.
Brilliant. And James, to sort of round us off on that one.
think it's these 3 points need to be fixed, right? Now you can read quite a lot into them. In fact, it'd be foolish just to take these 3 points at face value. But I don't think there's any magic trick or PR scheme which is going to suddenly fix any reputational issues. It's basically get off the grey list. Now we can have long discussions about whether initiatives that are being taken or have been taken could be communicated better. We can always have this discussion. Can we have better bilateral and multilateral relationships if it's the MGA with its peers overseas, if it's the country with other states? Yes, but I think fundamentally just get off the grey list.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I couldn't have said it better, really, and can only thank you ever so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and yeah, an insightful discussion, and we look forward to progress in Malta, and seeing it come off the grey list sooner rather than later, hopefully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.